the recording now. Yes, almost forgot. Yes, but so a good space really is this idea of active citizenry, and many of our members are here today. Essentially, we believe in change making. Change makers to us are folks who we don't want to wait for the formal institutions or the government to do everything. We want to come forward to do something for the issues and communities we care about. And I think this quote by Margaret Mead encapsulates it very well. So a good space cooperative, there's two parts of it. One is a good space, the other is cooperative. A good space actually started because we saw three challenges that change makers face. One of the challenges is that actually it's very easy to start ground up projects, but very difficult to sustain as you grow it. You face certain resource challenges, funding doesn't cover manpower, a bunch of other organizational challenges. A lot of the change makers we work with also have very little bandwidth to cooperate and learn across sectors because they are really firefighting. So therefore, they miss out on a lot of opportunities for innovation. And really, it's quite tough to coordinate action if you want to look at systemic change or kind of policy changes. You need to kind of engage with people from other stakeholders, and we just don't have that time, or some of us don't have the expertise also to do that convening. I know I'm certainly very, very new at this, and I struggle with this a lot too. So we wanted AGS to do three things. Basically be a platform where the change makers can come and do good better through three ways. One is we give them access to resources so that they don't burn out. Two, we help them to cooperate on ad hoc projects. And then three, we help them to kind of coordinate action to work on complex issues like our migrant worker issues or digital inclusion. So these are the two that we are looking at. Then the second part is cooperative. So cooperative, of all the kind of legal entities that we could have chosen, CLG, society, private limited, we chose co-op for these three reasons. One is that we thought that, as a co-op, if it's member owned, maybe the members can help with running the co-op, and hopefully it gives us more operational sustainability. We also, from a financial reason, thought if we register as a co-op, we can access like certain grants, like the new co-op grant, of which Alex from SNCF is kind of looking at administering. Then there's a very idealistic reason also to be Singapore's first co-op for change makers, and also to be a neutral space for the third sector, or in this case, the civil society, to organize action in a generative way. So we have 35 members. They cover 15 different issues and communities. So these are some of them, from the individuals to social enterprises to representatives of charities. But before I went for the trip, actually, this was my feeling. Like, honestly, I was feeling quite burnt out for three reasons. Mainly because actually the members in our co-op are quite diverse. So some people benefit from the community, some people don't, because the needs are just too diverse really. And really only a small group of members are actively engaging with the co-op. So we try our best to do different community development initiatives. Daniel on this call has been a leader in a lot of that in our community, but it's just so difficult to bring folks together, especially when their interests are so diverse. And from a financial perspective, when we look at this kind of cooperation and collaboration upstream work, it's not very tangible, and I think a lot of the funders that we spoke to didn't really see favor in that. So they always tell us that when the programs are developed, they will want to fund, but then the whole process in coming up with those programs, the research, the dialogue, the ideation, that's not something that they kind of wanted to look at. So I was really burnt out before we went for the trip. So when Justin kind of shared the trip with me, I thought I was quite curious about three things. To go there and see what kind of membership do the co-ops there have. How do they engage their members to take ownership, and then also what kind of fundraising models they use that we can learn from. So that was kind of the context for myself. Now I want to kind of invite Justin to kind of share why did he organize this trip, and as our trip leader, what was the whole background of the trip. So Justin.
I'm Justin, and I work for Chan Brothers Travel Agency. I advertised for a trip to Baltimore and people signed up. Just kidding. This trip was organized as part of the Transforming the Non-Profit Sector series that IPS and Tote Board co-organizes, and part of the package is it has all these learning journeys, and one of it is a study trip. And as we were doing research for this year's theme about mutual aid and contributing to commons, a lot of things pointed to Baltimore. And so the first thing I found out was the Baltimore Algebra project. So these were people who they paid impoverished African American kids a salary to teach their peers, so they didn't have to go flip burgers because they needed money, right? So I thought that was so wonderful. And then we also found out about Thread, which we didn't end up visiting for various reasons. Thread was organization that mentored youths, and they, unlike other mentoring programs, they say you commit for 10 years and then you do everything in your power. You make breakfast, you drive these kids to school for 10 years, make sure they get through school. And then third was the Baltimore Economic Roundtable. As Vincent mentioned, they provide technical assistance and they support the funding of worker-owned cooperatives. So I pointed to Baltimore, and we had people apply, and besides those that receive a travel subsidy, there were many others who joined us who were self-funded. And I think having that large group really, it wasn't just learning from a host, we were also learning from each other. Yeah. Is that enough, Vincent?
Okay. Thanks so much, Justin, for setting the context. And also, I want to point out our fellow travelers on this trip here. Rachel, Justin, Sylvia is here. Kenneth is here as well. Hope I didn't miss anyone. And later on, I will try to kind of get them to bring their voices in too. There's a lot of diversity in the room. So now I will go back to my slides. And yeah, so I will kind of start. We went there for a few days. Day one was, I guess, we went there 1 day ago. So I'll start from day 2 and day 3, which was the kind of crux of the experience. So like Justin mentioned, we visited the Baltimore Algebra project. And before I start sharing, I preface a bit. I am by no means an expert in any of this. So I just kind of want to share my perspective, and I hope this opens up the possibility for more conversation. And I do want to hear also what your views are. So I'm very excited for the breakout rooms later. So this Baltimore Algebra project, from what I understand of it and what we heard, right, it essentially there are some issues that students, specifically Black youths, face in the kind of Baltimore inner city. Inadequate funding of public schools, which then leads to overcrowded schools and poor instructional materials, especially in math. And it was interesting because they also mentioned that children in the classroom are taught in a way where they cannot relate to their math to their communities or experiences. So the traditional classroom instruction model, the kids don't really feel like very engaged with it. It was founded by Dr. Bob Moses and Ella Barker. So Dr. Bob Moses is this gentleman here. I think he passed away 2 or 3 years ago. Both of them were leaders in the civil rights movement. And when we kind of spoke to them, when us as a group went to visit them, they spoke about their intervention in 3 ways that I thought was interesting to share. So the first thing that Justin mentioned earlier was education. So one of the things that they do is they do math tutoring for Black youths. But the pedagogy that they use is quite interesting. So rather than using classroom instruction alone, they use things like games. We unfortunately didn't get a chance to see how this was conducted, but from some of the stories that they told, right, they said something like, oh, let's say they want to learn about distance equals speed times time, right? They will go take the free city bus, they will go 1 round, and then there will be some facilitated conversation about that for the youths to kind of arrive at this idea that the math formula of distance equals to speed times time. And it is this idea also that their belief sophisticated math can emerge from communities. That really stayed with me and stuck with me. The second piece was the economic piece, which Justin also alluded to earlier, in that who teaches the math? Interestingly, it is not...
Excuse me, Vincent.
Yeah.
Are you trying to do screen sharing, because it's still showing that you're trying to start screen sharing?
Oh, is that the same for everyone?
Yeah.
I can see the screen perfectly well.
Oh,
I cannot see leh.
Christine, maybe you want to dial in again.
I can't see those. Should I dial in again?
Alison cannot. Oops.
Is Christy using iPad? Maybe iPad got problem.
Try again. Zoom is just not working today.
Okay, let me dial in and dial out.
Okay. Alisa, you want to try that too? In case?
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. So I'll just continue first. Then this part later, Alisa and Christine, I'll send to you in the recording. But essentially what Justin mentioned there was really interesting. So the people who teach these math kind of classes, right, are not the experts per se or the adults, but actually the Black youths themselves. And in the last 20 years, they were sharing this stat. They've paid out over $4 million to youths who are the peer tutors. And this is really interesting because, like Justin mentioned, rather than flipping burgers, right, they can actually get paid to teach math, which is a very fundamental shift that I will speak about a bit more later. Like this really resonated with me. And the next one is actually the kind of political side of the intervention. So beyond just education and kind of providing a job for these youths, they create space for them to make decisions and run the organization and to be advocates as well. So the part of running the organization was really fascinating. So they have this kind of practice, right, where if you are above 25, you cannot make decisions, you cannot participate in the leadership of this organization. You have to be under 25. And they also kind of train these youth to essentially run the organization. They do things like filing taxes, planning programs, preparing funding proposals, things like that. There are still adults there, which we will talk about later, but the adults kind of play a more not really supervisory, but I guess advisory, is like a council of elders kind of relationship. And what was really interesting was also they get the youth to learn how to become activists and advocates. So the youth actually produce things like advocacy campaigns to extend the hours of the free city bus from 6 p.m. to 8 p.m. so that students can actually attend after school programs. They even did things like draft a national bill for student rights or something like that they then brought to kind of City Hall. They even did things to advocate for the closure of one of the plans for a 100 million youth jail. So it's very interesting because the city doesn't adequately fund the public schools, but they wanted to build a youth jail that was $100 million. So the students actually all organized to kind of like protest against that youth jail. So these were the three kind of pillars of the intervention. And I think my key learning was really, what does giving voice and power to youth look like? In particular, I had three kind of thoughts. Number one is I think BAP really appreciates the strengths of the youth, this belief that really every youth can be a good tutor. And one of the key questions I think a lot of us have as Singaporeans was, what if the kids teach the wrong thing? Or what if they don't know what they are kind of teaching, right? So what the folks from BAP shared that I remembered was they kind of trust the power of the community to self-correct, and they believe that when that happens, right, the kids kind of reinforce the strength of their learning. So that there is this very deep belief that the community and the group will figure it out and they will self-correct and become stronger for it. So that was one. The second one was the very ontological identity level shift of paying the youths to be math tutors. So one of the director, Jamal, was saying, right, that actually a lot of the youths in Baltimore, when they think about work, they don't think about using their brain to get paid. They always think about doing physical labor, like working at McDonald's or working in a warehouse or working in a hotel. But something like this, right, when they pay the youths to teach math, it changes their fundamental worldview of who they are and what value they can create. And I thought that was really special because if you can kind of change the way that you see yourself, right, then you change the possibilities that are available to you as well. But what was really interesting was they said, sometimes they can't give youths enough hours of paid work. So maybe they can only give youths like four hours of paid tutoring work. Whereas if you work at McDonald's, you can earn for eight hours and you earn a bit more. But it's this idea that they are getting paid to use their brain to learn math and teach math that they kind of want to inculcate in the students. And then the last one was they actually really take this very seriously, giving you space to make decisions and bear responsibility. So this $50,000 fund story was also very poignant for me. One of the executive director, Jamal, actually said that he spent a lot of time to raise funds and he managed to find a philanthropic funder to fund them $50,000. And then the funds came into their bank account and he wanted to use it as a surplus to kind of plan for next year's programs. But the youth decided that they wanted to use it to back pay salaries to math tutors who weren't paid during the pandemic. And Jamal had also offered some of his tutoring services. So he was financially vested in it as well. He was one of the folks who were not who were owed salaries. But the youth essentially listened to his advice and they decided otherwise. And so they decided to back pay. And so therefore the 50,000 came into the bank account and then went out immediately. And I think a lot of us, one of the key questions that came out also when we visited was, what if the youths make the wrong decision? And this African-American lady, very powerful, very resolute, right? She stood up and then she said this, the best way to give ownership to an oppressed group is to show support, even if you disagree with them, because that's how they know they have power. And I think this message really, wow, that night, This was all I could think about. Because I feel like it's such a powerful show of trust. And I think one of the other things that they said that was very, that resonated a lot with me was this idea that if the youths make a wrong decision, they trust that again, they will self-correct and they will learn how to make better decisions because they bore the consequences of the wrong decision. And because the adults allowed them to bear the consequences of the wrong decision. I think it left me really feeling like, what is youth run, and seeing this model, what can that be for the work that I do even in our co-op. So really this key reflection on how to balance trusting the process with achieving outcomes. So I think, when you trust the youth to do this teaching, when you trust the youth to make decisions, or if you extrapolate that to community, you trust community to make decisions. How can we balance that? And what if we don't achieve the outcomes that we want? And this idea that maybe progress is not linear. If the consequence of a wrong decision is more ownership, right, then isn't that a good outcome too? So these are some of the things that I've been sitting around with since the trip. So that was day 2. Day 3, we visited 2 co-ops, Meta Wellness and this AFS Appalachian Field Services. We visited 2 more as well on day 3, which I will share later on. But that's a photo of us doing yoga on the lawn, led by one of the therapists from the Meta Wellness Co-op. So this Meta Wellness Co-op is an interesting one. It's a worker-owned co-op of massage therapists and wellness practitioners. So previously they had an owner, and then the owner actually engaged these therapists as, some sound interference. Okay. Ray, could you help me to mute the person who's not on mute so that everyone can hear? You can hear some MRT sounds. Sherman, walao. Okay, Sherman. Okay, anyway. So they actually previously had an owner, and she had engaged the therapists as independent contractors. So they had unstable salaries and actually very few healthcare benefits. So one day the owner decided that she didn't want to run the business anymore. So interestingly, which I didn't know, the employees decided to buy over the business from the owners. And I thought that was such an interesting way of becoming a co-op, because in Singapore, the way I thought about it was, you can only register a co-op, but apparently you can turn an existing business into a co-op and have the employees buy it over from you, which was what happened. So these were the 4 kind of worker owners. I think there were 6, if I remember correctly. And this is a photo of their space. They have some very nice massage rooms. So this Appalachian Field Services, which we also visited, right? It's another worker-owned co-op. It employs folks who are recovering from substance abuse, mental health, and ex-offenders. Their primary work is to provide property renovation and property management services. So what they do is they take apartments that have been foreclosed by the banks, they kind of buy it back, and then they use the labor from the worker owners to remodel it, to repurpose it, and then they either sell it or they kind of rent it out at a kind of cheaper rate. So it was also again previously owned by an owner, and he actually sold it to this business to this co-op called Obran Co-op, which is a co-op that has stakes in other co-ops. Super fascinating. I won't go into it later, but I can put the link later in the chat. It's essentially a conglomerate of co-ops, which I'm not sure we have in Singapore. Maybe NTUC is one. But it's almost like an investor in multiple co-ops. So this particular owner who owned this Appalachian Field Services as a private company sold it to this Obran co-op. And the reason he made that decision was he wanted time and expertise from Obran co-op to teach his employees how to essentially run a worker co-op and how to be worker owners in a worker co-op. So he wanted that transition period for his employees. So this was another co-op that we visited that was pretty cool. Some key learnings, one that I mentioned earlier, actually, apparently employers can sell their businesses to employees, transition it to a co-op. We saw a few restaurants that were like that too. I think Justin brought us to some restaurants on the first day where essentially the owner was burnt out from having to run an F&B business for 12, 16 hours a day. And one day he decided enough was enough when his daughter went to kindergarten, and he sold his business to his employees, and he became a worker owner too. So that was quite fascinating. And in Meta Wellness, before someone can become a worker owner, they actually have to go through a 6-month period. So you kind of have to be a a kind of member of sorts for 6 months, right, before you can buy shares and participate in the decision making. So I thought this was an interesting safeguard, which I kind of wanted to look at for our co-op as well. Having people of the same values and going through time first before you get a chance to make a kind of ownership decision. Because for us, you can immediately buy into own shares, which may or may not be the best thing. And I was also exposed that actually there are different types of co-ops in the world, which I didn't know of. In Singapore, we generally have two big types, credit and service co-ops. But in the US, we saw actually there are quite a lot. Consumer co-ops, I think most of us are familiar with NTUC. But other models, right, are things like, which Ray is pasting in the chat now as well. Housing co-ops where people combine, they buy a house and then each person gets allocated to different apartment flats. This one, I think Sunita will be very interested. Producer co-op. So there's this artist co-op as well. Essentially artists sharing the purchase of raw materials and also accessing larger markets to sell their things. Sunkiss co-op is also like this, the Sunkiss Orange Agriculture co-op. Worker co-ops, which I just mentioned, and also shared services co-ops. So Singapore GP Plus is like that. It's a group of doctors, general practitioners who basically form this co-op to buy supplies at a discount rate without having to take a large quantity of their own. So it really expanded my view that there are really a lot of ways to run businesses in the co-op model. Some key reflections. I think one of the things that I observe, and I think Kenneth also mentioned this in his reflection, right, is that actually the sense of community and dignity and pride of the worker owners were very strong, both in Meta Wellness and also AFS. This gentleman in green, I forgot his name, but one of us asked, I think it was Sin Wei, our fellow traveler, he asked him, will you ever go and work somewhere else now that you've experienced what a co-op is? And he said, right, he feels like every day he comes, he comes to work, it's like coming home. It's like he's in a family. And if he ever joins somewhere else, he will always be telling them, last time in a co-op, we used to do this. So this kind of sense of familiarity was so strong. I was really moved by it. And I just wonder whether, can it scale if you have like maybe 10, 20, 30 worker owners, right? Will the feelings still be the same? The second other kind of reflection was actually co-ops don't seem to be very growth at all costs or profit maximizing, although there seems to be kind of like an acceptable level of profit which they have come to discuss amongst the worker owners. So case in point, right, this AFS, when they remodel the house and they sell it, they actually want to sell it at an affordable price so that people in the community can afford it, or they want to rent it out at an affordable rate. So there is this thinking of the community in their decisions to price as well, which I thought was quite fascinating and quite counter to the kind of traditional parts of capitalism where you just grow at all costs, you can make as much money as possible, accumulate as much surplus, on top of the whole idea that people feel empowered and a sense of dignity. So day three, we visited this Brad, Baltimore Roundtable for Economic Democracy that Justin mentioned earlier too. This one is my favorite one. I'm super excited by this. I think when I came back, I was just a lot of energy. So what does this Brad do? Essentially, it's like an association that helps either businesses start as co-ops or help existing businesses transition to co-ops by giving them access to knowledge and capital. And they have co-ops of different kinds. And I think Ray will kind of paste a link to the chat on the types of co-ops they have, from bicycle shops to staffing agencies. And this picture here is an ice cream co-op where the worker owners, they own this ice cream place. And it's also linked to this Seed Commons co-op, which I will talk about in the next slide, which I find really fascinating too. So this Seed Commons co-op, essentially they call themselves a community wealth cooperative. We didn't really get a chance to dive deeper into exactly how this works, but based on my research and the things that this lady who was the founder of Bread, right, Kate Cartit, said, essentially they make different kind of loans to co-ops. Either you start co-ops or you are a co-op and you want to purchase some kind of asset, they will loan you money. And the money from these loans comes from certain investors or certain donors. They have this philosophy of non-extractive finance. I am definitely not explaining this and doing it justice, but if you're interested, you can go to their website. They have an entire page that explains this non-extractive finance approach. But the long story short is that the repayment of loans comes only from an increase in revenues or profits stemming from the loan. So essentially, the borrower will not be worse off from having taken the loan. And since 2020, Brad has loaned out $2 million to 8 co-ops. And if I'm not wrong, right, 1 million of this was actually loaned to AFS, the Appalachian Field Services, to purchase a property which they then remodeled. It's quite a fascinating way of accessing capital, which I think currently in Singapore for co-ops we don't necessarily have. So here are my key reflections. I think I felt quite inspired and sad when I saw Brett. In many ways, I wish there was such support in Singapore for two reasons. I think one is this lady, Kate, right? You could really feel her passion, and she knew each of the 20-something co-ops that Brett was supporting by name. She was able to bring them together. And I feel like sometimes that is missing a bit. I've been running a co-op for 2 years. And to be honest, I haven't necessarily made any friendships with other cooperators. And it's not that I haven't tried. There just haven't been a lot of platforms for us to do this. I know SNCF organizes some of these forums, right? But it's just been so difficult. That sense of community hasn't been very strong. And also the access to knowledge that Brett does, right? So when they advise new co-ops, one of the things that they actually teach the new co-ops is things like how do you set up a decision-making model, which is very different from my own experience when I submitted the incorporation documents for registering a co-op. It is basically documents like who is in your board of directors, what is your 3-year financial plan, what is your risk management strategy. So it was very, very different. It was more of a, which leads to my second point. I think in Singapore, co-ops seem to be a legal entity to be regulated, whereas my experience of co-ops in Baltimore, it seems to be a way of running business in a collaborative way. So over there, they may ask, how do you make decisions? How do I work with you to structure your business model? But here in Singapore, a lot of the questions that I get is basically, what is your plan to make sure that you don't go out of your business so that your members aren't put in a tight spot? What is your break-even strategy in 3 years? Would your audit report do already not? You got to comply with your PDPA. And I mean, all these are very important, and I think it is important to be accountable, but can we have both? Can we have some of these support structures in Singapore? And the other thing that I took away from Seed Commons was, which we didn't get a chance to understand, right? Are there people who default on these loans that Seed Commons make? But my sense is that probably there are. And from what I read, right, it seems like there is an acceptable failure rate that the kind of Seed Commons kind of takes into account. So when they loan money, maybe some people will not be able to pay back because of certain business reasons. Even they do their due diligence, but you can't fully manage the risk, right? And I wonder whether we could have that also in Singapore. Because a lot of the funders and grantors that we've spoken to, right, seem to basically, risk management is a very strong culture here, and we've run up against it a lot. And I've had to prepare a lot of documents, a lot of kind of proposals to kind of convince them. And even then, it takes months and we don't go through. And it just got me thinking, this way Seed Commons functions is not unlike a venture capitalist. You kind of want to bet on 10, right? And then you see like maybe 1 or 2 become unicorns and you cover the losses. There is an acceptable failure rate. And even assembly lines in production companies in production factories have acceptable defect rates. So could we have that also for social innovation projects, right? And not think that everything has to succeed. We have to manage risk. How can we balance risk management and accountability with the space that innovation needs, the risk that innovation needs? And I guess my last suggestion or last thought is, can SNCF's role, so SNCF, the Singapore National Cooperative Federation, this is kind of like an association, advocacy association, which sits under the Registrar of Cooperative Societies, which is the regulatory association for co-ops. Could it be less of governance, but more of an enterprise Singapore role, where they kind of actively help us to expand to new business markets. They help us to connect to other co-ops, to learn these kind of business practices, to learn ways to make decisions. I think I see a lot of potential in SNC and maybe exploring these avenues of support. So Alex, I look forward to talking to you and sharing more, and hopefully Justin also is trying to push for a kind of a policy paper on worker co-ops with the CEO of SNC. So that gives me a lot of hope. So that's kind of my sharing. I wanted to bring in Kenneth's perspective as well. He is one of the fellow travelers on our trip, and he's the founder of Solve N+1, which is a consultancy that works on different pressing problems for society, as I understand it. Kenneth, I apologize if I didn't explain that fully very well. And Kenneth is also ill, so I really appreciate him making time today. So Kenneth, over to you.
Hello. I'm supposed to share. I'm sorry. I'm supposed to share about my experience there, right? I think Vincent has done a really comprehensive sharing, so I don't think there's much to add upon the notes. Just a few notable stuff. First and foremost, I think that there is a very clear acknowledgement in all my interactions with the different stakeholders when we were there, that there's a very clear fragility to their system. So with every folks that I met as a leader within the community, the first question I ask is, what happens if somebody decides to play corrupt or play punk with the system? And all their answers seems to be quite consistent. They say that if anybody wants to play punk, the system that they develop will fall apart quite quickly. And this has got to do with the fact that there's this struggle in terms of maintaining like the legal power and the legal strength. Especially in Baltimore, because Baltimore did not have a legal structure for worker co-op. They essentially practice LLC structure as a result of that. They also seem to be very clear about that role, and acknowledging that kind of shows a lot of strength in their vulnerability. And in doing so, the amount of trust that they have between each other is very clear. Meaning, as you speak to different folks within the worker co-op, no matter how young they are or how old they are, there's this level of alignment that is quite rare to see. And it's something that I think really blows my mind, because in Singapore, when it comes to, helping to build culture and all, it tends to be a very top-down heavy, meaning I send you for training, I give you like onboarding, processes, but because of this notion of ownership and the notion of having skin in the game, I think that allows them to thrive and rise up to that role as on that level. I've been thinking a lot about this in the application of Singapore, and I think if Singaporeans want to do it, we need to have a very strong mandate as a larger community. But the reason being is because Seed Commerce is a $50 million fund. If we juxtaposition this with the annual GDP of US in 2020, that's about $20.9 trillion, which is 0.502%. If I take that and I parallel in Singapore, it may mean that we have 10 cents on the dollar to kind of start up co-collaboratives. And that does suggest that for us to launch something successful does require not only the mandate of a large community, but also really backing from funders in order to kind of see this work. As a result of that, I think the experience of the risk will be a lot higher. But at the same time, the question we probably need to ask and assess is whether the risk is worth it. I just sent out in the chat that Seed Commerce, since they launched in 2004, their default rates for their loan is 4% for a $5 million fund. And I think that's really indicative of the trust and the strength in, enabling people to start worker co-op and, the level of discernment that they have, because it's clear that they do kind of function from affinity, that if there's enough affinity between people, then there's enough conviction and mandate to essentially launch something. So these are just some of the initial thoughts I have. I don't know whether I missed anything out. Vincent, you want to let me know?
No, I thought that was great, kind of, and it's kind of looking at it from a systemic perspective, or the structures at Singapore, whether they support that or not. I wonder whether you want to speak about that point that you made at the end when we visited Baltimore Algebra project about how they are really trusting the people and the kind of whereas maybe we think more about the processes.
Yeah, Baltimore Algebra project also kind of resembled that a lot. The main difference is their commitment to people. We asked the question of what if, right, the youth decides that the adults are no longer relevant? What would the adults do? And Jamal, without hesitation, say he'll just leave, because that's the level of commitment they have to trust their youth. To be honest, I think that stunned me a lot as a Singaporean, because like job security, right? Suddenly my job security is no longer on me in their case. But at the same time, I can't shake away the feeling that the proof is in the pudding. The fact that Baltimore Algebra project has lasted for 30 years, it showcases the strength of operating in such ways, and it shows the spirit in doing so. So when I was kind of having a chat with the director, I suddenly forgot his name.
Jay Gillen.
Jay Gillen. When I was speaking to him and we were walking, in one of the food courts, we actually bumped into one of his students from about 25 years ago. And for me, that really stunned me, right? Like there's just this level of legacy that is so present within the community. It is worth to note that in me discussing the financials with all the different cooperatives, none of them are sustainable at this juncture. They rely a lot on Seed Commerce and grants in order to stay sustainable. And Seed Commerce practice a lot of grant provision as well. So beyond just the loan structure, which is for the business, they also offer grants so that it can help sort of top up, the needed salary for them, which once again helps us understand that right now, as of now, they are generally unsustainable. But if we apply it in specific contexts, like example, if one day we have 12 worker owners coming together, going to HDB and say, hey, can I own a coffee shop as an entity of 12? Then there is a chance that such a model can be sustainable. It may not work so well with things that are not as popular, like food is obviously very popular and very necessary. Other things like massage therapy may be a lot more challenging, but it does show that it really has value. So cleaning services within kopitiams could be another one that can be run by worker co-op. So I think the characteristics of worker co-op does fit very well within the low income group. And yeah, I think that's really about it.
Thanks so much, Kenneth, for that wonderful and very, very succinct summary. And I think it really adds on. I guess I'm more of a ground level kind of seer, right? And Kenneth he sees things from such a strategic level as well. So I really appreciate him making time to come. We have some time. So I'm wondering, Justin, Rachel, or Sylvia, our fellow travelers on the trip, I think Wei Ting is here as well. If any of you would like to bring your voice in to respond to some of the things I shared or Kenneth shared, add a new perspective for our friends today, please feel free to unmute yourself.
I can go first, I guess. Something that the thing that struck me the most was that a lot of the participants had gone there looking at the solutions. Mendaki had gone there saying, "Wow, these people know how to teach kids math, and that's my problem. How do I learn the pedagogy?" And the Algebra project spent the whole day talking about anything else but the pedagogy, right? The pedagogy came only after everything was done, and we asked Jay, how does it actually work? They spent the whole time trying to change our mindset of how things work. And that was interesting because our non-profit sector's kind of paradigm is, even when you think about why a solution is interesting, it's always embedded in a paradigm. And the way we talk about solutions, what solutions make sense or should be worthwhile investing in, is embedded in the paradigm. We were being introduced to a different paradigm, and the paradigm was the logic of putting community first and seeing people. So, I mean, it's hard to really articulate it well, but the one way of putting it is to put it vaguely, like they put people first and they see the person as a whole in the context. So what do youth need? Youth in Singapore, if you're a non-profit and you have complex problems, right? The way which we address the problems is to reduce it into a dimension that simplifies the problem so that we can address it. So the kids don't do well in school, great, we'll give them tuition, right? If you don't have money, we'll give you financial assistance. But the Baltimore Algebra project realized something, is that these problems are not disconnected. I mean, we realized it's not disconnected, but we couldn't think of a solution that encompassed it, right? They saw it, right? So Vincent's triangle saw that, these kids, and they're very forthcoming about what their needs are. They don't just need money. They don't just need an education. They need money for other things, right? They're teenagers. They need money to go on dates, to go out, to buy clothes that look good. And if you don't address that, you're not never going to capture the kids. And so I think after this kind of long, elaborate way of communicating what their paradigm was and showing all these examples, then even Mendaki said, "Oh, I get it now. It's not just about the math." And then the sudden burst of realization, and then Victory was like, "Yes, you get it now." And I said, "Yes, I get it." And then they hugged and they teared, which was brilliant. But I think I'll stop here lah. There's so many things that were interesting. I'll hand it over to Sylvia or Rachel.
I think to add on to what Justin said about BAP, because I'm a youth social worker, so I think that really for me, for the trip, BAP resonates with a lot of things that I saw lah. Yeah, so I think I really like what Justin said about like how BAP see the youth as a whole, especially the triangle that Vincent shared. I think as a youth social worker, I think when we engage the parents, the schools, they always look at, this youth has this issue. Can you just, for example, this youth don't go to school. Can you just work on getting the youth back to school? But yet, as a youth social worker, we tend to see the youth as a whole. What are some of the factors that is really affecting the youth not being able to go to school? Yeah, and I think I really like what I learned and saw at BAP, where they saw the issue of academic, the poor academics in the youth, and they also saw that the youth has like a survival need, which is they need money. Yeah, and then they came up with this project to create this learning experience for the youth to learn math in a very fun and experiential way. Yeah, and at the same time, it can also get the youth to have the commitment, the ownership, to not just, I learned and I also earn some money to meet my own needs. Yeah, I think this is something that I also hope something like this can also bring back to Singapore context. Yeah, and see how to also support this youth. Yeah, because I think each of the youth really has the potential to grow, and also I think all this learning how to make decisions, how to even see your income expense statements is something that these youth will need this in adulthood as well. Yeah, so I think through this project, through this teaching, they not just teach them math, but also life skills that also can help the youth to thrive in adulthood. I think that is actually a lot of our hopes for the youth.
Yeah, thanks so much, Rachel. Sylvia, would you like to bring your voice in as a representative of the funder demographic? How do you feel when you visited the folks on the trip? Or maybe she's not in a place that's convenient to share. Okay, then it's okay. Maybe we can circle back. Wei Ting, would you like to? So Wei Ting was also one of our fellow travelers. Wei Ting, would you want to bring your voice in before we go for our breakout rooms? There you go.
Hi everyone. So waiting for S3 Enable. I think very privileged to be able to be part of the trip to observe. And I think I'll echo what Vincent has shared earlier. Really is the full commitment that the organization has towards empowering the individual. I think right up to not just the organizational structure, but also in terms of how the decision has been made, is really an eye-opener. And I think that as what Richard has added also is also how through finding a voice that the youth can also be empowered with the skills to thrive. I think this is something that I have common views on. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you so much, Wei Ting. Okay, Sylvia, are you there? Are you able to unmute your? Oh, okay, no. Okay then. So if that's the case, maybe I'll just share my screen quickly. So what we'll do in short moments time, we'll go into some breakout rooms so that we each have some time to also react to what we have been hearing. But before we go in, I just want to invite you to maybe take a few moments to go to Menti or scan this QR code and then tell us, right, what is one thing that stands out for you from the sharing so far. This will be one of the questions that we will kind of discuss later in the breakout room. So we invite you to please go to this link. I will paste the kind of link in the chat as well. 6348-2065. So please scan this if you can. We want to hear from you what's coming up for all of us as we kind of heard some of these sharings from myself and my fellow travelers in the last 45 minutes or so. Okay, and then I will swap over to this Menti screen to see some of the responses and share my screen. Oops. Let's see. It's loading. Oops. So just give me a sec. Supposed to show some word. There you go. So quick responses so far we have from 4 folks. Trust seems to be a common theme, not just about math, different kind of co-op, empowerment of youth. Yeah, so we'll just wait a few seconds. Welcome to, thanks Han. Yeah, thanks for coming by. Revenue generation, not the most important thing. Community comes first. Yeah. Okay. Ray, do we have the breakout rooms ready? Okay. Yeah, so we just wait a few seconds more for folks to kind of enter their responses. How are co-ops in SG going to survive? This one maybe later can discuss with Alex in the breakout group. I'm sure he has a good perspective on that too. Instead of 3P is P2P. Interesting thought and transition. A balance between risk taking and good discernment. Okay. Yeah, so keep the responses coming, and I will share this as well later in the post-event kind of email. But for now, right, what I'll do is Ray will put us into breakout rooms. The way the breakout rooms work is that we have kind of appointed some of the fellow travelers. So we've separated them. So you get a chance to hear from someone who went on the trip. So Ray, once you are ready, we'll go for, I think, maybe 25 minutes or so. And then the question that we invite you to kind of discuss is really what is one thing that stuck out for you, during this sharing by myself and my fellow travelers. If you have time, you want to go beyond that, what is one idea then that's coming up for you as you hear this, maybe in your own domain of work. Okay, Ray, ready?